you. So I'm so happy to be here. I need to make sure that I thank the sponsors for today's event. It's because of them and because of everybody that's here is why we can do this here. So be sure to check out our sponsors today and thank them for making ProductCamp Online a reality. So my name is Cindy Brummer and I am a UX designer. Honestly, I run an agency, so more of my role is as a product manager in running other designers and developers of my team. But really, down at the core, I'm a UX designer. But I wanted to share some things that I know about affinity mapping, which I've learned help make teams better and also help with stakeholders. A little bit about me. I've been running Standard Beagle for the past, it's almost been 10 years now. We are a boutique agency based in Austin, Texas. And then on the side of running all of that, I teach UX design at the University of Texas. I recently got my master's degree in UX through the Maryland Institute College of Art, MICA, and I'm hopefully will be a collaborator in residence starting in July with them and helping advise others. And I'm also a contributor on a new book that just came out through O'Reilly, 97 Things Every UX Practitioner Should Know. I have a chapter in there on user personas. It's a great book. There's a lot in there, and I think that anybody that does anything that overlaps with UX, which I know a lot of product managers do, it's definitely a great introduction to just lots of different topics. So what I want to cover today is kind of just the basics, but explaining what affinity mapping is, kind of the different flavors of it, when you can use it, and then also how. Like, I want to get into the nitty-gritty of how you would actually create an affinity map. And then I also want to talk about good moderation for a great mapping session. And so I've cut this down so that I can make sure that there's plenty of questions at the end. So Sue, if you'll keep me honest and give me like a, hey, you're going over, or you're not gonna have more than 10 minutes for questions, please do that.
I will give you your 10-minute warning. How is that?
That's perfect, thank you. So I'm such a geek. I love affinity maps. Like, they are magical for me. And I don't know if any of you have any experience in them. I'm assuming that you've come here to learn about them. I think they're really cool. And the reason that I think they're really cool is that they allow you to see patterns that you don't necessarily see just by gathering data or talking to people, throughout the company. You have to like put it all in front of you. And this tool like gives you that aha moment. And it like Marcel Proust said, it's all about having new eyes on something. An affinity map is basically a clustering exercise. And what it does is it allows you to take a large amount of data, fairly large, and put it in front of you and cluster common ideas and see what the patterns are that arise from that. It really helps you make sense of data. And a lot of times you can't see patterns unless you put it all together. And so this is a great tool for pulling together comments or survey data or numbers or survey responses or any kind of qualitative data that you collect from people. The other thing that it's really great for is just having it's a brainstorming exercise for bringing people together. And that's what we're going to be focused on today. Less about the, tool as a user researcher or a UX designer might use it for, but more in terms of how our teams and even our stakeholders, we can bring their ideas together. And this is not a new idea. This was developed back in the 1960s as part of the, the whole idea of, I believe it's like Six Sigma from the Kawakita hero, just organize ideas. So definitely not a new idea at all, but it's a really cool way to think about data. There's some key parts that you want to make sure that you include in an affinity map. And we're going to talk about each of these, but essentially you have to have a purpose. You don't want to just create one and not know why you're creating one. So kind of core of it to start with is figuring out what you're trying to do with it and why. You also want to have someone be a leader for the affinity mapping session. And especially if you're bringing a group of people together, you need to make sure that leader is going to help keep people on task. Otherwise, it can just kind of spin off into the nether worlds, and everybody kind of walks away thinking, what was the purpose of that exercise? So you definitely want to have somebody that can help bring everybody together. You also want to do it in some sort of prepared space. Now, as the world is opening up again, our companies are able to come together. We can go back to the traditional means of using whiteboards and bringing together people in a conference room, but there are ways to do this online. There are definitely tools that let you bring together remote teams and stakeholders who aren't in the same room. And then the other piece is the content. What content are you going to be bringing together? And when you're thinking about your team alignment and any kind of brainstorming, there has to be some sort of preparation that goes into it. You definitely want people thinking about what you're going to be talking about before you bring them into the room so that the content is ready to go and you don't have people sitting around and scratching their heads. So here's an example of a physical affinity map, and it basically has 3 elements to it. It has a lot of different kinds of data. So it looks like it has notes and printouts of interviews, and it's kind of hard to see from this picture, but just all kinds of different data. The data is grouped together into various sections of whoever's in the room is seeing patterns and pulling it together, and they've also labeled it. So that's really essentially all an affinity map is just pulling it all together, and it looks like a hot mess, but believe me, this is going to give you a lot of insight. And it's amazing because even that hot mess of sticky notes and notes and printouts and all kinds of scribbles help us recognize patterns. And it's such a great tool because it's just so simple to use. You really don't need anything highly technical. You just need some planning and preparation. And the other thing that's great about it is that it involves every team member. If you're doing this right, every team member has a voice, which is a great way of bringing together people from your team, maybe people from multiple teams, so that they all feel like they have buy-in. And it's also a great way to exercise the critical thinking parts of our brain. In addition to being creative. So the creative and the critical thinking and the analytical all come together in this. And so it serves all parts of the brain, and people that are more analytical and feel like they're part of it. People who are more creative feel like they're part of it. And it also makes our work visible, which is even better when you're working with a team, because you can show, the higher ups or, anyone in the company, well, what are they doing? Well, look at that work that they did. So it really helps you make your work visible. The other thing about it is that it's such a great way to see things that we wouldn't normally see. There is pattern discovery. And I talk to my students about this all the time, about just the wonders of the human brain. The fact that our brains are wired in to see patterns, and we don't even think about it, but we are constantly looking for patterns all the time. And all an affinity map does is take our natural innate ability to look for patterns so that we have a way to do that, like right in front of us amongst all the data. And the great thing about it is that it allows us to dig deeper and ask critical questions to help us go in and figure out what is the root of what we're trying to solve here, and see things maybe that we wouldn't have asked had we just kind of thought about it driving in our car or at our desk. And it's also simple and inexpensive. We don't need fancy, AI to help us see these patterns. It's just not, it's not necessary. We can do this without spending a lot of money. So really, you can use affinity mapping for all kinds of things. And I have. You can see, all these different scenarios where you can bring people together and get a whole bunch of ideas. And I just want to walk through the situations. First of all, stakeholder alignment. I love using affinity maps to bring together, especially at the very beginning of a project, especially when you have a lot of different departments that are part of this, whatever project you're going to be working on, making sure that they all are part of that vision setting. This is a photo from something that I did a few years ago, where there was a nebulous kind of redesign project that we were going to be working on with as an outside vendor to kind of a public agency. And that group can be very opinionated, and it was critical to get them on board and have their buy-in for what the vision of the redesign was going to be. And so this was a amazing exercise, because once we got their buy-in, the rest of the project went so much more smoothly, and they were going to bat for us with even a board of directors that was elected to oversee the work. They would stepped up and said, the work that they're doing is exactly what we want them to do. So stakeholder alignment using this is really great. You can also use it for customer discovery. I'm not going to be going too much into that, but this is a great way to take learnings from customers and put it in front of you. And related to that is also for user research purposes, having a whole bunch of qualitative and quantitative data for UX designers to put that together and see patterns so that you can understand deep user insights. It's a great tool. The main thing I want to focus on, not just stakeholder alignment, but is bringing together that team. That team brainstorm this is a great way to bring everybody together so that you can pull information and ideas out of different kinds of people who may not always contribute in a standard, sit down meeting at a conference table. This is a great way to get their ideas front and center, and it's also fun. And I'm going to focus on that. So I really want to talk about how to make an affinity map, because this is part of the how do you do it? So I want to start with that. And the first thing is, what do you want to accomplish? You have to make sure that you're clear on that purpose. So to give you an example, I'm a very opinionated person. I run an agency. I speak out a lot. I don't have a boss per se in my company, so I feel pretty comfortable saying, well, I think we should do this. But I've learned over time that if I'm really opinionated, other people don't want to speak up. And so when I want to make sure that multiple parts of my team are speaking up about ideas for the direction that we need to move in, say with a marketing plan or with just a product strategy that we're going to be undertaking, I have to use an affinity map. And so I will set a purpose of, say, we have a product we're going to be working on, and I need to understand the best ways to move forward and what your ideas are for it. That would be, say, my purpose for it. So it doesn't have to be incredibly specific, but it needs to be specific enough that you can get everybody on the same page. Once you decided the purpose of your affinity mapping session, that's when you need to start preparing the actual nuts and bolts and the tools for it. You need to make sure you have enough time. I've tried to do this in an hour. It rushes things. It's not a great amount of time in which to sit down with people and get them to generate ideas. So if you are only going to do an hour session, plan on that there's going to be a few of them. And also make sure that you give people materials, say, to read ahead of time so that they can be prepared once they walk in the door. I like to have a large whiteboard to work off of. I don't know if you guys can see, but in my office, I have a giant whiteboard. Some short of that, you can use tools like Miro or Mural. There's a lot of them out there now that have a digital whiteboard that you can work off of. I love to have Post-it notes. So you can see here, I keep Post-it notes all over the place, and I keep Sharpies. Sharpies are best so that you can see notes that you make on a sticky from a distance. Miro and Mural also have those little sticky notes you can drag around the screen, which are pretty cool. And I also use dot stickers. So when we have a whole bunch of ideas and we want to narrow down, we use dot voting. And so I just go over to Office Max and get some dot stickers. But again, some of these things are already built into these digital tools. So if you've already picked a tool like that, then you already have that. Now, once I've got my space prepared, then it's time to kind of get moving toward that session. And I want to make sure that I assemble the team, make sure that everybody has time to be there. And in terms of the team, I want it to be a diverse group of people. It doesn't need to be huge. Generally, I have sessions with anywhere from 4 to 8 people in the room. You can get more than that, but I found that sweet spot is usually around that 5 to 7 number, maybe a little bit less, maybe a few more. And I like to make sure that they're coming from different perspectives. And it can be diversity in terms of backgrounds, positions, all the different ethnicity, all the things that you do. You want to make sure that you can be as diverse as possible. So I don't like to just have a brainstorm session with all UX designers. We have a team that includes some sales folks and some developers, and I like to include them as well. I want to make sure that I've chosen the right facilitator. I feel pretty comfortable facilitating, but sometimes there's other folks in my company that I want to maybe help to groom them to be good facilitators, or if I'm working with another company and I'm having them do that in their team, I want to choose someone that has presence but isn't overwhelming. I want them to be able to encourage good communication and also be able to step in when things are kind of going astray in the conversation and bring people back. So it's really important to find the right person for that role. And so I mentioned the purpose, so that's really important there. You also want to make sure that you're getting set with whatever it is you're going to be doing. So in terms of a team brainstorm, say if I'm doing a product strategy, I want to make sure that everybody that's walking in knows what it is we're going to be talking about. They're not walking in blind. I might send them a project brief. I might send them maybe notes from different areas, like how we've done things before, whatever that might be helpful to kind of get them up to speed in a short amount of time, but so that they're not trying to learn once they step into the meeting. I definitely want to be sure to prep that data. And then you have to decide whether it's going to be online or in person. There is a little bit of a difference to working online than in person. I'm not really going to cover remote considerations today because of the time, but you want to make sure that you're taking kind of the medium into account, because it's a very different thing to do this online versus in a conference room together. Now, I mentioned that moderator is just so key, and there are some very important things to consider in terms of moderation. You might do this differently. Even if you're a team lead, you might have to step into your facilitation role a little bit differently than how you would be as a manager of a team. The most important thing is to be a listener. You have to listen to everybody, and everybody needs to feel safe in terms of sharing ideas. You also need to make sure that you can pull people back to the table when side conversations start happening, which often happens in a team situation, or especially if you have a team that works closely together and there are inside jokes and memes, and I mean it can be really fun and you want it to be fun, but you also want to make sure that people stay on task with what you're doing. And so it's really important to guide the activity, have some presence so that people are leaning in and listening and wanting to participate. And then you also want to make sure to stay objective. At this point, no ideas are off the table. At no point should anybody be filtering. And so it's really important that you're saying yes and over and over and over again to get people to feel comfortable writing their ideas down, that they're not going to be heckled or ridiculed by anybody else who is, because you know those kinds of folks. They'll say, oh, we've done that before. That's a stupid idea, or like, oh, that'll never work. That should not happen. And a good moderator is going to nip that in the bud and set the ground rules at the very beginning It's really important that everybody feel like they have a voice. And once you've got everybody around the table, you've set expectations, you've told them what you're going to be doing and what the purpose is, this is when you start working out the ideas. Everybody gets sticky notes and you just hand it to them and you give them a prompt. So that prompt might be, let's start with, what are all the things that you could come up with, that would help with the strategy around this particular product or whatever it is the purpose is going to be. You want to have multiple questions to get them thinking. And what I do is I will give them a time box, about 2 minutes, in order to write down as many ideas as they can on their sticky notes and put them on the whiteboard. And I usually do this in a quiet, like 2 minutes where everybody's thinking and nobody's talking. And then I stop them. And then I give them another prompt where they have to answer the question differently. Like, what are all the things that could go wrong? What are the worst ideas you can come up with? There's lots of different questions you can ask for prompts, but the whole idea is that you want to get things rolling and get people comfortable with sharing. The rule here, though, is that it has to be one idea per sticky note. You don't want them to add all of their ideas onto one sticky note. You want to make sure that they're only putting the one. That way, when you need to start converging and figuring out which idea you're going to go with, that you're not having to rip sticky notes in half. Now, once you've taken the amount of time that you're going to set and getting all the ideas up into the whiteboard, this might be the time when you're going to be having somebody go through the board. The facilitator might be the right person to do that and go through and make sure that you understand the ideas that are on each sticky note. Now, again, you're not filtering at this point. All you're doing is seeking to clarify, understand the idea. So I used this particular method when we were coming up with a working team agreement. And everybody wrote down ideas of what they felt was important in working with other people. And we had a giant whiteboard just full of scattered ideas everywhere. And we went through to clarify, things like everybody needs to be heard. But there were quite a few things where people said pizza or more video games. And I just wanted to make sure to understand what people were coming up with, not seeking to filter them out. Once I've clarified what everything means, that now's the time to start grouping. Now, you can see in my picture here, there's different color sticky notes, all being moved around into different groups. Here's the thing with grouping. It's typically best done silently with a couple of individuals, and they're not talking to each other as they're moving sticky notes around. There's also no rules. They're looking for patterns. They're looking to see, like, what are some of the commonalities amongst the ideas here on the board? For example, with our working team agreement, there were lots of variations on the let someone else be heard. They might be, finish sentences or, be respectful. And we saw that a lot of the same things pop up together. And so the group that was sorting was moving those all toward a center group. Now, they could have sorted it differently, but that's honestly, it's up to the people who are doing the sorting to determine what those groups should be. And people could move them around. There was a little bit of, back and forth and thinking about it. And this is about a 5-minute, maybe sometimes 10-minute activity, depending on how many sticky notes are on there. It's okay to keep coming back. You might even have multiple groups of people go up and rearrange things because they might, after having watched the group sorting, go up and resort. It's totally okay to do that. This takes some time, but once you've kind of got those groups figured out, this is when you start labeling those categories. This is when you start drawing big circles around those groups and then giving it some sort of label or name. what are the commonalities? And, we ended up narrowing down our working team agreement to about 5 specific things. Each one of those different things represented one of the groups that we had in our affinity diagram or affinity map. We wanted to make sure that we were representing each of the groups accordingly. And so depending on the purpose of your map, you might have, just a few different categories, or you might have a whole bunch. It really depends on how much brainstorming activity took place during that initial piece of it. I would say that probably the most important thing after this, though, is to capture it. Take a picture of it. If you're working digitally, you can export your map and send the picture or the PDF file to everyone else. You want to make sure to capture it. At this point, sometimes you have too much and you need to narrow it down. Like maybe you have too many ideas and you need to figure out, how am I going to make sure that I'm going in the right direction? So this is where dot voting comes in. And I've heard, different groups have different rules. What I tend to do is I will have a voting session where I give every person in the room either 3 or 5 votes, and they will take their stickers and they will vote on all the ideas that they like. And it could be, if they have 5 votes, they can vote on 5 different things, or they could use all 5 of their votes on one thing that they're really passionate about. At the end of the day, you kind of look at all the voting, and then you can narrow down as like, well, this one looks like this is the one that everybody wants to go with. And that's the magic of it, is that when everybody can stand there and see the buy-in of how everybody wants the direction to go in, you get that commitment. It may not be agreement, but it's commitment. And I'll give you a couple of pictures to kind of show you. This was a brainstorm that I did with my team, where we were really working on defining a new focus for our agency. We had been trying to be a one-stop, all marketing type shop. And at this point, we really wanted to narrow down what it is we were going to be talking about on our website. And we did a 5-minute activity where we were all coming up with different things of how we were going to be handling our business. And so we had sales and marketing and our strengths and research, and this was how we were starting to define our next steps with our messaging on our website and what was important to us. And you can see it can get a little silly, because over here on the right, we had like food, like Pizza Friday. For some reason, my team is just obsessed with food and getting together and eating. And so I always expect this from my team, but it was fun. And while not everyone agreed with everything that people put up on the board, everybody had commitment and buy-in at the end of the day, because they all felt that they were able to participate. I did another similar type situation with a team I was working with around a product, and we were trying to define what our customer strategy was going to be. And we were also in this activity trying to figure out features that we were going to build as part of the product. It's very early on in the product definition stages. And so instead of trying to, figure out just randomly on my own all the different features, I really brought together the team. And it wasn't just designers, and it wasn't even just a developer. We brought in the stakeholders and the rest of the team to help define what was the most important thing. And I think everybody was using the yellow Post-it notes, and we were just coming up with rapid fire ideas everywhere. Then we started to group them and pull them all together into, you can see the categories here. We had something for the dashboard. We felt that reporting was really important, personalization. And then from that point, we did some voting, but we did it a little bit differently. We had some of the dots, but we really started changing colors of the Post-it notes. This was done in Mural. And you can see the red ones were the ones that we felt that's not going to work. right now. We're not going to do the red ones. And the yellow ones were the ones that we were like, okay, that could be next. The green ones were the ones that we were going to focus on first. And so we got a little bit more creativity, but we could definitely see the direction of it. And once we were able to, capture this is what guided the design and the move forward with the product and the strategy. And so it was really helpful for everybody to get on board with it and no more arguments around it. So I really feel that understanding it, and seeing those patterns is one of the most important things you can do. And sometimes it's equally important to pull in all the ideas and understanding where other people think, and from whether they're our teammates or our stakeholders or anyone in our company that can help define that. And so that's why I love affinity mapping. And I wanted to open it up at this point to questions and see if I can answer any.
Please remember to put your questions in the chat. Cindy should be able to answer those, and she has about 5 minutes for questions. Then we'll go to the next.
I see. Do you categorize data from all the prompts on the same affinity map? How can you avoid a potential confusion this might cause? Well, it depends. Sometimes it really it depends. It depends on how much you're asking. Sometimes I have a ton of data, and yes, I'm putting it all in the same affinity map. It can get confusing, and sometimes the affinity map does take a lot of space, like an entire ceiling to floor or ceiling to floor wall of data. And it can get confusing, but at the same point, you start to see similarities. You'd be surprised how much pattern recognition is in there. So that's why the purpose is so important. So sometimes the things that you collect aren't necessarily related to the purpose of what you're trying to understand. And so that helps narrow it down and prevent confusion. Let's see, at the latter phase of mapping or voting, how much time would you allocate for discussion on convergence, on decisions and direction? So the voting part, I give, I let sometimes people take 5 to 10 minutes. There's a lot of thought around where they want to put that precious vote. And so the voting itself, I give about that much time. I have found just in my experience that there's not usually a lot of discussion around it. Sometimes there's only 5 to 10 minutes after that, because it's almost like people go, okay, well, now that I see that everybody is in this direction, I'm down with that. You'd be surprised at how much buy-in you can get just from folks recognizing that they were outvoted. So that's one of the beauties of affinity mapping. You can easily get into a rabbit hole when doing this. When do you stop? That's why I time box things. You just have to kind of learn a good cadence. I generally do somewhere between 2 and 5 minutes per prompt of adding ideas and getting them all up there. And then I also will put a time box on the voting and on the grouping and say, okay, we got to finish this up. That's where a good facilitator can kind of read the room and see okay, we're going down a rabbit hole here. Let's bring it back together. Let's see, Sue, did I miss any questions? Okay, here we go. How do you convince stakeholders to do affinity mapping? Well, so honestly, I've managed to convince them just by inviting them to the meeting, and they really don't know what to expect. And then they get involved in the activity, and then they have no idea. They would have said no if I had said, let's do affinity mapping. But instead I kind of approached it as we need alignment. So let's all get together and do a vision, session. And that has been how I have convinced them, because they've seen the benefit of it just from doing the activity. In terms of convincing them to show up, I think it depends on the person. Let's see, make sure that I have, does the result of an affinity mapping exercise result in the product roadmap? I have done it sometimes. Sometimes I have to overrule things that just don't make sense technologically or feasibly. I have created, like I've used that feature generation. I've taken like all the results and then I've gone through and I've analyzed it in terms of effort and technology or whatever those key points are. And so it helps guide it, but it doesn't immediately translate into a product map. I really think that there has to be another filter in there in terms of like judging like effort for sure. Let me go this. Let's see. Yeah, bringing them to the meeting for the outcome, not the method.
So
It's a good one.
I think that's about it. It'll give us 5 minutes to transition and people get to their next session. I first want to say thank you so much, Cindy. Very interesting, well thought out and presented. Great stuff. And thank you so much.
Thanks. I appreciate everybody coming, and you can contact me through my company at standardbeagle.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. Be sure to message me that you saw me at this talk.